Hello, everybody. I'm John Fawcett in for Lou Dobbs on today's episode of The Great America Show. The RNC wrapping up its final day today in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with President Trump expected to speak this afternoon and accept the nomination for president. President Trump also this week tapping JD Vance to be his vice presidential nominee for the Republican ticket in November. New developments also out this week from the Secret Service. We now learn that the attempted sniper of President Trump was sighted 3 hours before his assassination attempt on President Trump, walking around the venue with a rangefinder, then coming back shortly after with a backpack, to which the authorities also noticed that and alerting the Secret Service. To take all this up, we're going to bring in Mike Benz. He's our guest today. He's the executive director for the Foundation for Freedom Online. Mike Benz, it's great to have you on the Great America Show. So there's so much to talk about. The FBI heading this investigation into the Trump assassination attempt. You've got Secret Service director talking out both sides of her mouth. I mean, you have politicians now talking out both sides of their mouth. You have Joe Biden talking out both sides of his mouth. What's going on? What's your assessment on what took place that day and where we go from here?
Well, we don't yet know. The details are so scant. You know, if somebody says something that triggers the cancellation mob, within 10 minutes, we have their YouTube, their Instagram, their Facebook, their X history, their Reddit history. And it's now coming up on 120 hours since the shooting, and it's a total black hole. The FBI has essentially jumped on the grenade the same way they did for investigations around January 6th, the same way they did for investigations around the Gretchen Whitmer Fednapping, the same way they did around basically every seemingly major event where there appears to be a federal nexus. Nobody should have any trust in the FBI. It's the same FBI that plotted to have an insurance policy to stop Trump from being elected in the first place. And as I've been saying on social media all week, I believe there's a straight through line from the January 6th pipe bomb situation to the present one, where the January 6th pipe bomb situation, you had a bomb device planted 17 hours prior to it being discovered at the exact location where Kamala Harris, then the vice president-elect, arrived at, which meant the Secret Service had to have cased the area. The Secret Service was in charge of security of the building. And they somehow missed, we are to believe, a pipe bomb planted at the literal foot of the park bench at the entrance to the building. And meanwhile, the FBI has not disclosed a single new video file, even though they have something like 39,000 video files, they said in an interview. They've not released a single one to the public since September 2021. So that's 3 years ago. They've not told us the age, the race, the gender, a single suspect lead. And they even have a tape of the pipe bomber planting the bomb. But they cut the tape off early from the stationary camera when they disclosed a partial fraction of it to the American public, which means we don't even know if that was the actual pipe bomb device, the same one that the Secret Service apparently found that was planted the night before, because the FBI is not letting us see the actual commission of the crime that they have on tape, which is an absolute, frankly, crime in and of itself. It automatically flips the burden to suggest malfeasance. Right. Magically, the FBI told us that the cell phone data of the pipe bomber, who was text messaging from the very bench where he planted the device, was corrupted, was not corrupted for any of the 2,000 people approximately who've been indicted by the Justice Department, but for the one person who walked around barefoot on the home court of the national security state, Capitol Hill, the one person who was potentially responsible for a mass casualty event, the most deadly threat to the entire January 6th storyline. The FBI has sat on that investigation and apparently destroyed evidence and is failing to withhold the critical evidence showing the actual commission of the crime. You know, it looks like a similar thing is happening here.
You bring up a good point. And I mean, there's so many parallels, and it seems like everything that's wrong with this country stems back to the FBI. I mean, they have their hands in everything. Some of the parallels you had mentioned, the bomb was planted the day before. In this, we're hearing reporting now from the Beaver County Police Counter Sniper Station that was stationed outside the event, that they saw this gunman walk into the facility hours before the attempted assassination. He walked in hours before with a rangefinder. Now, why would you walk in there with a rangefinder? Number one. Okay, this man leaves. He comes back hours later with a backpack. The emergency services unit of Beaver County then alerted the Secret Service and I guess the county police once again. So now we know hours before this has happened that this man may be a suspect. Okay, now let's add insult to injury. His parents called into the local police and said that he had been missing that day. Now you couple that with these reports now you're hearing. Obviously, we're not getting anything from his social media and the cell phones and all that stuff, but we are hearing from some of his former classmates. And you're hearing a similar profile of one that you hear from people who commit these acts. He was bullied in high school, unfortunately. His nickname was the school shooter. I mean, you have all these red flags, and you have his parents sitting at home knowing that this kid is probably troubled. They can't be immune to the fact that, what he went through or what he was dealing with. Knowing that this kid is possibly a threat, you have all this coupled together. How does the most important agency, perhaps in the world, keep missing these things?
Well, they don't keep missing them. They were the ones who orchestrated the Whitmer Fednapping / we're told assassination attempt of the Michigan governor. They orchestrated the entire thing. They had a federal informant actually fly people around the country in order to coordinate it. They had federal agents attempting to sell everyone pipe bombs and even teach them how to make the pipe bombs. You had the case in 2017 with the member of the 3 Percenters, and it turned out that that person was radicalized by a federal agent. You had the Buffalo shooter, the so-called MAGA Buffalo shooter 2 years ago, who was in a 6-person group chat, and one of them was a retired FBI agent. You have, this goes back forever. You can read a book called The Terror Factory by Trevor Aronson, which is, the FBI basically ginning up domestic terror plots, including the one in Garland, Texas, where there was an entire criminal trial for attempted murder, and it didn't come out until 4.5 years after the trial that the FBI had an informant becoming that person's best friend and texting him to, quote, tear up Texas. And it didn't come out until after the murder trial, again, years later, only because the defense attorney had a sympathetic insider at the Arizona field office of the FBI, that it turned out the FBI actually was trailing the man who attempted to commit the ISIS-style terror attack in a car behind him on the way to the event. Now, it seems likely to me, or at least possible. Now, I'd say it's possible for, certainly, but the longer this goes on, where there's no social media, there's no communications, there's nothing pulled from the cell phones, this total black box combined with the Secret Service malfeasance, which, by the way, is exactly what happened with January 6th. The Secret Service wiped all of their phones so that no one could see what they were talking about or what foreknowledge they had or what parts of the area they were investigating or what threats they were responding to around the pipe bomb at the exact location of the VIP they were protecting, Kamala Harris. And so, to me, I don't even think of it through the lens of how could the FBI miss it. Right. We need a totally alternative means of federal law enforcement and investigation in this country. There is a big problem, a big Strait of Gibraltar, if you will, at our Justice Department, through which all ships must pass, that is clogging up the ability for the American people to understand the crimes of the national security state. And the FBI is where evidence goes to die. I don't think the FBI necessarily orchestrates all of this, but I think that rogue cells essentially have insiders at the FBI who can be trusted to kill investigations that implicate others on the outside. This is the same thing with the CIA. They're not necessarily the taskmasters of it all, but if the Pentagon wants to do something, if USAID wants to do something, if political insiders want to do something, the CIA has plausible deniability. And so you give it to them, even though it wasn't necessarily the CIA's idea. And here, basically what we really need to end in this country is this concept of a so-called ongoing investigation, right, which is this idea that the FBI can take 100 years to finish their investigation. And the American people are boxed out the whole time. The FBI never catches the bad guy. Never. The local law enforcement does, the crowd does, but the FBI is put in charge when they want an investigation to die. Right.
You look at, you had mentioned the pipe bomber. I mean, everyone seems to forget about Seth Rich, the DNC staffer, who was shot in the back of his head in what they called, I guess, a attempted robbery, but nothing was robbed from him. I mean, it's situations like this that make you really wonder, what do they have to do with this? What is their role? And when we come back, I want to take that up. If they had any role in this, if the CIA, the NSC, we're getting reports now that the NSC alerted Secret Service hours before that rally that there was an Iranian assassination attempt planned for President Trump. We're talking with Mike Benz. He's the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. We're talking with Mike Benz. He's the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. And Mike, right before we went to break, we were talking about the FBI's role in all this. Do you believe any government agency, whether it be the CIA, the NSC, the NSA, had any role in this Trump assassination attempt?
Let me respond to one thing, actually, we talked about right before the segment, and then I'll answer that. You mentioned Seth Rich. And it's useful to keep in mind that DHS played a strange role in the cover-up of the Seth Rich situation. DHS put out a white paper in September 2018 called A Whole of Society Response to Disinformation. And in that white paper, they laid out the necessity of censoring conspiracy theories online about the death of Seth Rich, and even said internally, then in this white paper, that basically conspiracy theories online about Seth Rich and who might have killed him and whether it was an inside job from the DNC or political insiders, that redounded to the benefit of Russia, and that Russian news channels were talking about the Seth Rich murder. And so therefore, you could censor all U.S. domestic speech about Seth Rich under the predicate that it was advantageous to the Russians and therefore indirectly part of a Russian disinformation campaign. Of course. They love this predicate because this is what allows them to crack open the Department of Dirty Tricks that comes from DHS, DOD, CIA, NSC, our foreign-facing dirty tricks powers that allow us to overthrow foreign governments or rig foreign media ecosystems. And when you have a foreign predicate, it's the Russians, it's the Chinese, it's the Iranians, that gives carte blanche essentially for those big boys to come in and do dirty work. And here we're now hearing that, frankly, I don't believe for half a millisecond, that the Iranians have one flying fig to do with what happened on J13 here, with the shooting of Donald Trump and the murder of Corey Campertori. So, but this is something they tried before. Ahead of January 6th, they tried to say that the Proud Boys were being backed by Iran. Right. And I think that this is very deliberate with the messaging here. I think what they try to do is they see that a lot of Republican, establishment figures are very hostile to Iran. They're not necessarily going to buy, the Russian disinfo gamut, but they're trying to basically placate portions of the right. And if they can essentially send them down a primrose path about a hostile foreign nation that they are genuinely hostile to, such as Iran, that gives a kind of political point to that faction of the GOP to sort of blame Iran for what happened, right, instead of blaming the FBI and the DHS. And I should note, again, one of the scandals with the fact that we don't have the social media accounts, we don't have any of the cell phone data, we don't have the communications, it's that we don't have the network. The FBI declared the night the shooting happened that this was a lone gunman with no wider conspiracy. They made their conclusion of the investigation before they even started the investigation. Yeah. No one has the godlike, prophecy power to do that. But that's now the official story before there's even been an official investigation. Now, what happens if there was an FBI informant or agent, or DHS informant or agent, or JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force informant or agent, who was talking to this individual, who was radicalizing this individual, who was teaching this individual how to make, pipe bombs. We're hearing rumors of potential explosives. Who's teaching this, advocating this person, to go train at guns. We've seen the FBI and DHS do this 2,000 times before. And the fact that they are dragging this out as the, ticking down date to election day happens, it seems very clear to me, the longer this goes on, that the reason they're not turning those over, and I shouldn't say very clear to me, but it seems like at this point, a very significant likelihood that the reason they're not disclosing the wider network of online and digital communications that this person has is because there was somebody involved that they don't want us to know about. Now, I should note one more thing. They were at this shooter's house for 4 hours before they even told the public his name. When you are at that person's house, you have the router that they use, which means you have the IP address, which means the FBI knows every Google search, every single thing that the would-be assassin of Donald Trump and the murderer of Corey Compertori knew, every communication, every email he's ever sent, every search. How do you make a pipe bomb? What are the nearby training? That entire chronology can be pieced together simply from the IP address, which they have. And the fact that they are putting a black box, an effective black hole over the entire investigation of frankly, one of the most scandalous events in American history, suggests there's something about that they don't want us to know.
So are you erring on a scale? We'll call it 1 to 10. Are you erring on the side of that they had full-on involvement, or that they're involved in a cover-up, to cover their own rear ends, that, they missed this?
Well, there's obviously a cover-up, but in terms of the direct involvement, this is still the week that it happened. I'm going to, evolve my opinions as evidence comes forward, and that evidence appears to be coming from weird outside sources rather than the FBI and DHS itself. I mean, I think it's frankly telling that we have more information from BlackRock about the shooter than we have about the so-called Federal Bureau of Investigations.
It's sort of interesting to see the blame game now. It started, between local officials and the Secret Service, and I guess eventually the FBI will start pointing fingers as more evidence comes out to show that maybe they, had some involvement. Maybe they knew what was going on, what this man was thinking, or as you suggested, maybe we're working to radicalize this man. But you have the Secret Service director conveniently going on CNN this week, first putting the blame on the local, the county police. But now she's saying that they didn't have any agents on that roof because the slope was too dangerous. I mean, this is stuff, that you couldn't make up for a Hollywood scripted play or a movie. The slope on the roof. You look at the pictures of the roof that the other gentlemen were on, and it was far more sloped than that. I don't know where they found this woman. I guess they found her from PepsiCo. She was responsible for protecting Coca-Cola facilities. But I don't know how this woman is the woman for the job, and how Joe Biden is allowing her to stay in that position. It just stinks to high heavens.
Yeah, it stinks to high heavens. Kim Cheadle, the Secret Service director, also defended the Secret Service deleting the Secret Service text messages about the January 6th pipe bomb. I mean, this is a cover-up artist. She should be, in any sane world, she'd be fired for that statement alone, that they wouldn't have people on the roof, because it's effectively flat with the most minor incline that even a baby could circumnavigate. But this is, it looks like a cover-up. That's just what that looks like. I mean, and the fact that the Secret Service deleted all the evidence with January 6th for a pipe bomb in their jurisdiction on the front leg of a park bench to the entrance of the building. And then when they were interrogated about it, because it took an entire year for the public to learn that Kamala Harris was at the DNC building that day, the Justice Department lied and actually said in prosecutorial indictments that Kamala Harris was in the Capitol building. It took an entire year for it to come out that actually the Secret Service and Kamala Harris were at the pipe bomb location. And then when Jim Jordan launched an investigation on that and requested the cell phone data, they purged it. Listen, it's a cover-up.
The thing that's most mind-boggling to me, it's like the FBI doesn't have enough real crime to fight in America that that they've got to manufacture. I mean, it's the craziest thing in the world. We're talking with Mike Benz. He's the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. When we return, we're going to take up a few things. Trump tapping JD Vance as vice president. What that means for the party. Joe Biden wants to reform the Supreme Court. It only took him a few days after this assassination attempt to get right back on his bandwagon. And Facebook is allowing Donald Trump to go back on Facebook and Instagram. We're going to take all that up when we return. We're talking with Mike Benz. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. We're talking with Mike Benz. And Mike, right before we went to break, we were talking about some of the latest news pieces of the week. Trump tapping JD Vance. Let's begin with that. What's your take on JD Vance? What does he mean for the ticket? And what does he mean for, freedom online as we go forward here?
I think Trump has great instincts, and I trust his instincts in this case. I think JD Vance has taken many bold positions that have earned him the ire of the neoconservative establishment in the GOP, which I think is, bravery is probably the most important trait you can have as a politician in the current era. The fact that JD Vance has been hostile to the funding of endless war in Ukraine and against Russia has earned him the ire of Mitt Romney, who I think came out and said there's no one he has more contempt or disrespect for than JD Vance. It's, I would say, even more than an endorsement from the president, a condemnation from Mitt Romney is probably the single best badge of honor you can have as a politician in the modern era. So the fact is there is this history and backstory of JD Vance voting for Evan McMullin, the CIA agent who was put up by the neocons in 2016, put up by Bill Kristol. You had this condemnation of Trump by Vance in the early years, but many people, I think, fell victim to the kind of Clockwork Orange tonality and fake news of mainstream media and became disenchanted with that and ultimately moved closer to the truth and, frankly, closer to Trump because of that. So I trust the president's judgment here. Vance, I'm told by sources I trust, has his heart in the right place and has come a long way in the past several years. And again, the fact that he has staked out these bold positions is quite a refreshing change from the role of vice presidents, frankly, for the past 20 years in being a kind of buffering containment zone for the blob to have a backdoor into White House decision making. The fact is Mike Pence was a blob creature. He was very much belonged to that warmonger and military and GOP kind of Reince Priebus establishment GOP class. Right. And there were many things run through the Pence side of the White House that I think were hostile to the president's agenda. I think that Joe Biden, frankly, played a similar role in the Barack Obama presidency, as the former 40-year dominating force over the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the guy who effectively ran most portions of most critical foreign policy decisions for the Obama administration. I think Biden was the blobs guy, inside the Obama presidency. And I think that you could have seen something happen similar here where Doug Burgum or someone else, chosen as Trump's VP pick. And I think JD Vance sort of sits in that spectrum between the sort of Vivek type right. and the Doug Burgum type. And I think that's strong. Elon Musk called it assassination insurance. And while that's a dark framing, you can't help but suspect that it's true.
Yeah. It's truly interesting. And I think the only thing we can do is pray to God, as we've had to do, I think, every day for the last 3.5 years as Joe Biden is president, that JD Vance does work out. Joe Biden, I mean, it only took him a few days to get back to his hateful rhetoric after, promising, He was going to tone down the rhetoric of the mainstream media. They had to take off Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough, and Mika on that Monday after the shooting because they were scared of what these psychopaths would say. I mean, it's truly insane. But Joe Biden back to work, or his regime back to work, I should say. In the coming weeks, apparently they're looking to propose sweeping changes to the Supreme Court, which would propose term limits and an ethics code, whatever that means. Although it's nearly unlikely that it'll happen because a constitutional amendment would be near impossible. Why are the Democrats always trying to? I mean, they're the epitome of moving the goalpost, taking the ball home, when they're upset. What is wrong with these people? I mean, what goes through their head in this last, I guess we'll call it since 2016, since Trump derangement system came out? What has gone through these people's heads that they're just so adamant on changing the rules of the game?
Well, it's power over principles, right? I mean, their only principle is staying in power. Now, I don't, generally speaking, have a problem with reforms to the process, especially when you believe institutions are corrupt. I mean, that's frankly what I propose every day when it comes to reforming the rules of the road for the Justice Department, the FBI, DHS. But in this case, what they're operating on is total bogus. This idea that they simply just didn't like the way certain decisions came down this year. If the Supreme Court had simply ruled the other way on 4 or 5 decisions, they wouldn't be doing this at all. Right. And that what they've cooked up around Clarence Thomas and Scalia, this idea that because there was a flag flown at his home, right, that it was the same flag that flies in many of the Capitol buildings of U.S. states, a symbol many Americans had never even seen before, but they tried to make it into a January 6th symbol, and then they tried to use these sort of financial ethics complaints around Clarence Thomas. I mean, notice how it's only against their adversaries. I mean, the whole thing is so shallow. There's no basis to it whatsoever, and it should be, and I believe it probably will be crushed.
If the shoe was on the other foot, you'd hear the Republicans whine about it, send a strongly worded letter, and then it would, all go away in a week. Before we wrap up here, I know you got to run, and we appreciate you taking the time. Facebook announcing this week they're going to roll back restrictions on President Trump's account, the first time since January 6th of 2021. Meta put out a statement saying, quote, "In assessing our responsibility to allow political expression, we believe that the American people should be able to hear from the nominees for president on the same basis." Why now? Why just now, a few months out, have they changed their position?
Because they're cowards. Because they're cowards. They think Trump might win now, and they want to butter up. They want to make it look, while there's still time to do it before, the election itself happens. They want to try to have a couple months of coasting to say, "Oh, we're on your side now, buddy boy." Right. I mean, this is the same thing Google did at the TGIF meeting the day after the 2016 election, when there was a question to the Google C-suite on stage about whether or not, the Google was going to boycott funding the Republican Party because Donald Trump just won the night before, and the Google C-suite came up to the responded and said, actually, we're going to do more lobbying than ever. We need to have a seat at the table. We can't be boxed out of Washington. Frankly, I'd like to believe that Facebook is doing this because of hostilities from the Biden administration. We saw that come out in the so-called Facebook files that Jim Jordan subpoenaed from the Weaponization Committee, where it was clear that the C-suite of Facebook was terrified of the Biden administration. They internally in their own emails, they said they only changed their censorship policies because of intense pressure from the Biden administration, and that they did it. They tried to find creative ways to be responsive to the censorship requests because they had bigger fish to fry on multiple policy fronts with the Biden administration, meaning that the Biden administration was withholding favors for them, protecting them against foreign governments, that protection would fall away unless Facebook did what they wanted. And I don't think that Trump would be as scorched earth in his diplomacy with big tech. Trump famously called MAGA Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon. But the fact is I think that the timing of it means that they, like certain other world leaders, are resigned to the very real possibility Trump may win in November. And just as they feared President Biden and wanted to do favors to not be on his bad side, they are only sort of turning over on their bellies because they're fundamentally cowards.
Right. And it seems they're trying to fall in line with what Elon Musk has done. I mean, Elon's been ahead of the curve along the whole entire way. I mean, a great man now endorsing President Trump. He got some pushback from Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom retweeted an old quote from President Trump saying, when Elon went to the White House, he was on his hands and knees begging. He would have been on his hands and knees begging for subsidies. Gavin Newsom tweeting out, "You bent the knee," to Elon Musk, and Elon brilliantly tweeting back, "You never get off your knees." Elon Musk is a great American and now endorsing President Trump. So I think he's going to be on the right side of history, pledging $45 million a month until the election.
Well, he called that fake news. I should note, he's disputed that Wall Street Journal report. He posted a meme of the animal, a new in a guy in a new suit, and called that fake news. So I don't know that's actually accurate on the 45 million front. But I do want to just make one quick point about Facebook to say that if there's no reason that Trump should have had any hindrances on his account for the past 3 years. There's no reason whatsoever. It's total insanity. They were wrong to deplatform him on January 8th, 2021. Right. They were wrong to keep him off for years. Right. They were wrong to throttle him. And again, this is about cowards versus great men of history. And the fact is when push came to shove, Mark Zuckerberg was a coward, and Elon Musk is a great man of history.
Yep, these people, these executives, Mark Zuckerberg, they want it to be these Soviet United States. I truly believe it. Mike Benz, you're a great American. Thanks for everything you're doing to fight back against these oligarchs.
Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks to Mike Benz for all the great work he's been doing to expose the corruption among these government agencies and these government gangsters. Be sure to join us the rest of this week for the Great America Show. Thanks again for being with us. God bless you. God bless America. And may God bless Donald J. Trump.